Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from Raus IAS Study Circle. Join the official Telegram channel of Raus IAS Study Circle to stay updated and get all the materials on the Telegram. The link to the channel can be found in the description box. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading from a UPSC Civil Services examination perspective. Now today let us take up the new daily edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 12th November 2021. The news to be discussed has been displayed on the screen and time stamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. So on this note, let's start our today's discussion from our prelims and mains perspective. Now continuing our series on discussion on prelims question for 2021, let's take up this question number 84 asked in set A. Now this question says that at the national level, which ministry is the nodal agency to ensure effective implementation of Scheduled Tribes and other traditional forest dwellers recognition of Forest Rights Act of 2006 or Forest Rights Act of 2006? Options given were Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, B. Ministry of Panchayati Raj, C. Ministry of Rural Development and D. Ministry of Tribal Affairs. Now this topic was discussed through the concept of minor forest produce and later also through TriFed. Now this topic, which was covered in the May 2020 edition of Focus magazine, said that Ministry of Home Affairs had issued an order to exempt certain activities regarding minor forest produce, plantations, NBFCs, cooperative credit societies and construction in rural areas from lockdown restrictions to fight COVID-19. So in this regard, we discussed about minor forest produce, where it was highlighted that the term minor forest produce has been defined under the Forest Rights Act of 2006, and here it also mentioned about TriFed, which is Tribal Cooperative Marketing Development Federation of India, which came into existence in 1987, and TriFed is a national level organization functioning under the administrative control of Ministry of Tribal Affairs. Now since we are talking about the Scheduled Tribes and other traditional forest dwellers recognition of Forest Rights Act 2006, and this corporation was formed under Ministry of Tribal Affairs, hence this was a fairly simple question. Now based on the Focus magazine from the section of Polity and Governance, we asked similar question based on the topic in the prelims test series for General Studies Current Affairs for the month of April-May 2020. Now here the question was rather on minor forest produce, and here one of the option was regarding the administrative control. So the question was, consider the following statements about minor forest produce. First, it is an important source of livelihood and provides both subsistence and cash income for forest dwellers. Second, the Tribal Cooperative Marketing Development Federation of India, that is TriFed, helps in selling the minor forest produce of the traditional forest dwellers and the scheduled tribes living nearby the forest land. And third, Tribal Cooperative Marketing Development Federation of India, that is TriFed, functions under the administrative control of Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Obviously, this option was incorrect. And similarly, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change was also given as one of the option for this particular question. So here the correct answer becomes D, that is Ministry of Tribal Affairs. And if you have gone through the explanation provided in the prelims test series, it not only mentioned about the Forest Right Act of 2006, but also mentioned about the nodal ministry for TriFed under the Ministry of Tribal Affairs. Hence the correct answer here becomes D, that is Ministry of Tribal Affairs. So starting our discussion, let's take these two articles together appearing on page number 1 and also as a lead article on page number 6. So the news on page number 1 says that India seeks $1 trillion in climate finance, and this has been set as a condition to meet its target of carbon neutrality by 2070. So the aspect of climate finance has been set as a condition on the developed world. And based on this understanding, this lead article says that the lowdown on India's Glasgow announcement. Now this article suggests that the announcement made by the Prime Minister at Glasgow in Scotland to achieve carbon neutrality by 2070 was a shock announcement, because this aspect was never revealed by the Government of India officials, as they had number of meetings on this particular aspect. So in this regard, this article says that newly unveiled commitments at COP26 deserves examination as they came amidst very contradictory official signals. So in this regard, this article highlights various aspects and also the constraints which will be faced by Government of India in order to achieve the goal of carbon neutrality by the year 2070, as the first condition itself is that of climate finance of $1 trillion by the developed world. So based on this understanding, let's understand the important highlights of both these articles one by one. So first, let's go through the important highlights of this news appearing on page number 1, and then we'll go through some of the highlights of this particular lead article, which closely examines India's commitment at Glasgow. So the question is that how India wants to achieve climate neutrality by the year 2070. And for this, Government of India has provided a 5-fold plan which aims at reducing carbon intensity of its economy and eventually achieving net zero by 2070. Now these 5-fold plan includes: number 1, India's non-fossil energy capacity will reach 500 gigawatts by 2030. Second, the country will meet 50% of its electricity requirement with renewable energy by the year 2030. Third, it will reduce its total projected carbon emissions by a billion tons by 2030. Fourth, India will cut the carbon intensity of its economy to less than 45%. And if India is able to achieve all these 4 targets, then this will effectively help India in achieving the 5th target, that is achieving net zero by 2070. Now the problem here is regarding climate finance. And all these 5-fold plans will depend whether the developed world will provide India the climate finance worth $1 trillion. Now the problem here is that this demand of Government of India by the developed world to provide $1 trillion is 10 times more than the unmet demand of $100 billion a year, which the developed world promised to pay to the developing world. So this would also mean that advanced economies will have to give India the same amount of funds that they have promised for all of the poor countries. Now here the developed world may not commit India to provide such a huge amount of $1 trillion. So based on this contingency, these 5-fold plans might not be achieved in real by the year 2070. Now another point highlighted in this news on page number 1 is regarding the Nationally Determined Contribution, or NDC. Now India submitted its NDC way back in 2016, and so far it has not updated its Nationally Determined Contribution targets. So despite these 5-fold plans given by the Government of India, India has not formally updated its Nationally Determined Contribution to achieve carbon neutrality by or net zero by the year 2070. So this aspect of achieving 2070 so far has not been made formally a part of NDC, and the government officials in this regard has said that submission of NDC, including that of net zero by 2070, is conditional and is subjected to the availability of amount of $1 trillion, which the developed world must give or must provide to India. However, the decision as to when to submit revised nationally determined contribution so far has not been taken by the Government of India. So this aspect of achieving net zero by 2070 so far remains as a pledge, and it has not been updated through India's NDC, that is Nationally Determined Contribution. Now, based on this understanding of Nationally Determined Contribution and also India's 5-fold plan, the lead article appearing on page number 6 provides a close examination as to whether India will be able to achieve net zero by 2070. So let's go through some of the analysis as has been given in the lead article with respect to examining the 5-fold plan provided by Government of India to achieve net zero. Now before moving further, let's first of all understand some of the important terms which has been highlighted in this article. Obviously the first term is net zero or climate neutrality. Now net zero simply means that the amount of carbon dioxide that is emitted must also be constrained. So it says that you're carbon neutral if the amount of CO2 emissions you have put into the atmosphere is the same as the amount of CO2 emissions you remove from the atmosphere. So whatever CO2 we put in the atmosphere must be removed in the same quantity. And it says that net zero is broadly same as carbon neutral. So even though emissions are still being generated, but they are offset by the same amount somewhere else. So the net total of the emissions must be zero. Now the article also mentions about a term known as emission intensity. Now it is a volume of emissions per unit of GDP. Now suppose if the GDP of a country was 2%, then the GDP rose to 3% and is now 4%. So how much was the volume of CO2 emission from 2 to 3% here, and how much was the volume of emission from 3% to 4%? So this is referred as emission intensity. It says that reducing emission intensity means that less pollution is being created per unit of GDP. However, this is not generally the case, because the moment a country grows in terms of its GDP, it also means greater industrialization is taking place in the country, and obviously it means more emission of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. So it says that it has been witnessed that growth in GDP generally results in more carbon emission. So for India to achieve emission intensity will be a major target and also a major concern. And for this, India have to rely more on non-fossil fuels, which does not release carbon dioxide in the same manner as released by fossil fuels. Now another term used in the article is business as usual. Now this term has been used with respect to policy making and also with respect to the sector of energy. So in the energy industry, it says that business as usual scenarios are based on a set of assumptions which is built on historical norms projecting the configuration of the energy system 10 to 50 years into future. So business as usual can be said to be a baseline to compare alternative scenarios or a starting point for analyzing a particular system. For example, analyzing the use of fossil fuels or even analyzing the use of non-fossil fuels. So after understanding these important terms, let's look into India's projection targets and also certain concerns as has been raised in this article with respect to India's 5-fold targets to achieve net zero by 2070. Now the first point highlighted is regarding reducing emission intensity, that is emissions per unit of GDP. So India need to reduce its greenhouse gas emission per unit of its GDP, and that too by 45% in 2030 relative to 2005 level. Now this will be difficult to achieve, and India needs a proper roadmap to achieve this target of reducing emission intensity by 45% by the year 2030. Now it says that India's existing NDC and subsequent submission to UNFCCC confirms a steady decline of emission intensity over 2% per annum, that is per year from 2005 onwards. However, in order to achieve 45% of reducing emission intensity, will definitely need a roadmap in order to achieve this. The next point highlighted is cutting absolute emissions by 1 billion tons, presumably from projected business as usual level of 2030. Now it says that India's current annual emissions are around 2.8 billion tons and projected to reach around 4.5 billion tons in 2030 on a business as usual level or on a business as usual basis. So of these 4.5 billion tons India's emission, India aims to reduce the emission by 1 billion ton. That is, the remaining is still 3.5 billion tons. So it says that the pledged reduction would be a substantial 20%, comparing favorably with several developed country targets. Now the problem here is that reducing this absolute emission by 1 billion ton is mostly based on India's railways net zero 2030 target, which will cut 60 million tons annually, and through LED bulbs, which will cut another 40 million tons per year, that is annually. So this will yield a 1 billion tons over 10 years, which is to be achieved by the year 2030. So this is how India aims to achieve or reduce carbon emission by 1 billion ton. That is mainly by making railways net zero and through the LED bulbs. So here the article says that this may seem easy to achieve, but in reality, India may struggle. And also, in order to cut absolute emission by 1 billion tons, India also need to diversify into different sectors. So different sectors or industries should also commit to achieve this aspect of net zero, so that this target of reducing 1 billion ton of carbon emission can be achieved easily. The third point says 500 gigawatt of non-fossil fuel, that is renewable energy, installed power generation capacity by 2030. However, as per the report of the Government of India, particularly Central Electricity Authority, there seems to be an anomaly, as has been highlighted in this article, as the data does not match. It says that the Central Electricity Authority in its 2020 report on energy mix for 2029-30 has projected around 525 gigawatt, or roughly around 64.3% of non-fossil fuel installed capacity or renewable energy installed capacity. Now this also includes 280 gigawatt solar power and 140 gigawatt wind power. Apart from this, it also says that only 267 gigawatt is projected to come from coal and lignite. So according to the government's report, almost all of India's future growth of capacity is to come from renewable energy. So the article says that there seems to be an anomaly, as this cannot be possible. So it says that on installed power generation capacities, India's existing nationally determined contribution had incorporated government's declared goal of 175 gigawatt from renewable energy sources by 2022, as even though the nationally determined contribution has been stretched to 2030. So this raises an anomaly with respect to difference in data. However, the problem highlighted in the article is that despite these figures, India has reached only around 101 gigawatt of solar and wind power due to numerous constraints. And even by adding large hydropower and nuclear power plants, as both are now considered as part of renewable energy, current renewable energy installed capacity is about 150 gigawatts. So there seems to be certain anomaly with respect to the data submitted by Government of India and also the target which the Government of India aims to achieve by 2030. So the news says that India at Glasgow therefore seems to have pledged virtually no additional coal-based power plant. So for the government, this will be tough to achieve. Now regarding the fourth point, it highlights 50% electricity generation from renewable sources by the year 2030. Now the article highlights that this pledge of the Government of India is even more than the projection of Central Electricity Authority, which is 44.7%. So the article suggests that these projections may be difficult to achieve given the constraints to expand renewable energy, especially for electricity. And the fifth point highlighted here is regarding achieving net zero emission by 2070. Now here the author says that apart from the pledges, there are certain other steps also which the Government of India must need to take. These includes accelerated deployment of electric vehicles or fuel cell vehicles, and this deployment must go alongside rapid reduction in personal use of vehicles and also a major push for mass transportation. Further, the article also talks about carbon locks-in and green construction codes for infrastructure. Now, carbon locks-in occurs when fossil fuel intensive system perpetuate, delay or prevent transition to low carbon alternatives. So suppose there is a power plant which is using coal. Now, the power plant wants to shift from coal to say some renewable energy. However, the carbon lock-in occurs when this power plant using coal finds it difficult to shift to another renewable energy, or this shift gets delayed. Now this shift further increases greenhouse gas emission in the atmosphere, particularly carbon dioxide from coal. So it says that investing in the wrong infrastructure can result in carbon lock-in, whereby planners commit themselves to a certain amount of greenhouse gas emissions for the lifetime of infrastructure. And this can be at times in decades, that is 10 years or even more. Further, the author also mentions about employment intensive recycling of waste goods and materials. and also solid and liquid waste management, which is linked to methane recovery. So all these in a combined way will effectively help Government of India in achieving net zero by the year 2070. Now further, the article also mentions about two disappointments, mainly with respect to the fact that India has not committed to declaration on deforestation, and second, India did not join global methane pledge. So it says India refused to join over 110 countries in a declaration to end deforestation by 2030. Now India's pledges also do not mention NDC target for forest and tree covers, in which India is known to be slipping. Now this implies that environmental laws in India are diluted in favor of the corporates. Even the tribals and other forest dwellers are removed from their places, and this not only is impacting environment but also their livelihoods. So the article says that together these may confirm the worst fears of many regarding efforts to dilute environmental regulations in favor of corporate interest. And the second disappointment highlighted in the article is that India did not join the global methane pledge, which was done by over 100 countries to reduce emissions of this short-lived but potent or important greenhouse gas by 30% by 2030, as methane is among the fastest growing greenhouse gas emission in India. So these are the two disappointments as has been mentioned in this article, which Government of India should have pledged to. So as a conclusion, the author says that infrastructure for resilient island states step must be taken for India also. Now in this regard, first of all, let us understand about infrastructure for resilient island states so as to understand what the author in this conclusion tries to highlight. So this infrastructure has been co-created by Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure with support from member countries and organizations, and also small island developing states representatives. So the IRIS aims to support SIDS, that is small island developing countries, in order to achieve sustainable development through systematic approach to resilient, sustainable and inclusive infrastructure. It further says that IRIS aims to promote disaster and climate resilience of infrastructure assets in SIDS, that is small island developing states, and also share latest knowledge and learning targeted to specific infrastructure sectors. Further, IRIS aims to work along with small island developing countries to identify opportunities for partnership and technical collaboration to strengthen infrastructure system for resilient development in these small island countries. It further says that the goal of IRIS will directly contribute to SAMOA pathway, that is SIT's accelerated modalities of action, and targeted to deliver three outcomes. And these three outcomes are to improve resilience of SIDS infrastructure to climate change and disaster risk, strengthen knowledge and partnership for integrating resilience in SIT's infrastructure, and promote gender equality and disability inclusion through resilient SIDS infrastructure. So these are the three intended outcomes which the infrastructure for resilient island states aims to achieve for small island developing states. And based on this understanding, the author suggests that infrastructure for resilient island states must be taken for India as well, because even in India, impact of climate change is very much visible with respect to coastal erosion, sea level rise, urban flooding due to extreme rainfall as we have just witnessed in Chennai, haphazard urbanization, etc. And all these are acquiring threatening dimensions as per the author. Further, the author also suggests that there must be a consultative process in updating India's nationally determined contribution, as after 2016, India's NDC so far has not been updated. So the author concludes that it would be ideal if the ongoing updation of the NDC was done through a cross-partisan multi-stakeholder consultative process that would make it truly nationally determined and also implemented properly. So these are the important points which has been highlighted by the author in this lead article. Thus both these articles becomes important from our prelims and mains perspective and gets covered under GS paper 3, especially with respect to conservation, environmental pollution and degradation, and also environmental impact assessment. So after understanding both these articles, let's move on to the next article for discussion. Now the next news to be taken up also appears on page number 6 as an article. Now it says a tax burden that attacks the federal rights of states. The centre's levy of fuel surcharges is way beyond basic taxes and an abject misuse of provisions of the Constitution, namely Article 271 of the Indian Constitution. Now this topic becomes important from the perspective of GS paper 3, especially with respect to Indian economy. So let us understand what the issues have been highlighted in this particular article. Now the first issue highlighted in the article is regarding impact on fiscal federalism. Now here it says that because of increased cess on petrol and diesel, the extra money which is collected by the center is appropriated by the center and that money cannot be distributed among states. So whatever additional benefits the center is accruing is not going to the divisible pool for distribution to states. And based on this, the author suggests that this impacts the federal right of states and also fiscal federalism, as cess is not distributed among states and remains with the center. So here the author says that increased cess on petrol and diesel is only benefiting the center and not the states. Now coming to the second point in this article, it talks about misuse of Article 271 of the Indian Constitution. Now very basically, Article 271 allows center to increase duties or taxes through surcharge on such products or on such items which are not included within GST. Now if you go through Article 271, it mentions about surcharge on certain duties and taxes for the purposes of the Union. It says that Parliament may at any time increase any of the duties or taxes referred to in those articles except goods and services tax under Article 246A by a surcharge for purposes of the Union, and the whole proceeds of any such surcharge shall form part of Consolidated Fund of India. So surcharge collected under Article 271 forms part of Consolidated Fund of India. Now here the author says that there has been an increase in surcharge manyfold as compared to the basic taxes, and this amounts to misuse of Article 271, and it also curtails states' rights with respect to these funds. Now let us understand this misuse of Article 271 through an illustration which has been provided in this particular article. Now this article mentions about the revenue collected by the central government on petroleum products for the year 2020-21, and this revenue for the petroleum products is rupees 3.72 lakh crores. Now of the rupees 3.72 lakh crores, 18,000 crore was collected as part of excise duty. Now this is the basic component of the tax, whereas rupees 2.3 lakh crores was collected as cess and rupees 1.2 lakh crores was collected as special additional excise duty. Now both the cess and special additional excise duty constitutes 95% of the total revenue from petroleum products, and this part of the revenue cannot be shared with states. Whereas only the part of excise duty which is collected by the center, which came to be 18,000 crore, can be distributed among states. Now rupees 18,000 crore of rupees 3.72 lakh crores forms mere 4.8% of the entire revenue collected by the center from petroleum products. And of this 18,000 crores, only 41% becomes the part of divisible pool. So this is what the author highlights, that a substantial chunk of the revenue collected from petroleum products by the central government is not shared with the states, and this impacts fiscal federalism and also federal rights of state governments. Now another point highlighted in this article is that the promise that states' revenue loss because of implementation of GST will be compensated has not taken place because GST compensation cess has not been provided in time. Further, the article also mentions about the fact that promise of maintaining revenue neutral rate post GST, that is after GST, has not happened, and this has also impacted not only the rights of state but also the share of tax for states. Now to understand this point, let's understand about revenue neutrality. So, according to revenue neutrality, if there is a change in mechanism of tax collection, then the tax collected or the amount of tax collected in both mechanism, that is in the earlier mechanism and in the new system or in the later mechanism, must be same. So it says that a change in tax structure can be said to be revenue neutral, that is, it does not impact the revenue if the modified tax is able to realize the revenue comparable to the original tax regime relative to tax base. So here the author says that earlier the average tax on goods was 16%, but in the new mechanism of GST, this has come down to 11.3%, that is average tax on goods. And based on this, the new GST collection is approx rupees 12 lakh crores per annum, which also means rupees 6 lakh crores for center and states. So it also means that monthly collection by the center is roughly 1 lakh crores. Now this article says that had the revenue neutral rate been maintained with respect to implementation of GST, then tax collection at 16% would have resulted in 18 lakh crores. Now this would have meant 9 lakh crores both for center and states, which also mean an additional 3 lakh crores for the states as compared to present 6 lakh crores. Thus this article suggests that GST must be streamlined in order to ensure that the revenue neutral rate is maintained and loss sustained by states must be shared by the center. Thus, this article becomes important from the perspective of GS paper 3 under Indian economy, and certain aspect also becomes important under GS paper 2, especially with respect to provisions of the constitution regarding article 271. Now this article appears on page number 7, and this is with respect to a discussion on the fact that whether economy is still reeling from demonetization. So this topic of demonetization becomes part of GS paper 3 under the aspect of Indian economy and issues relating to planning, mobilization of resources, growth, development and employment. So in this article, let us understand very briefly about the impact of demonetization mainly on the informal sector of the economy. This is what this article has talked about. So the first highlight is regarding the impact of demonetization, especially with respect to MSMEs and on the informal economy, or which we can say on the base of the pyramid where most of the informal sector of India thrives. So here the article says that demonetization impacted daily transaction of money and hit the MSME badly. Now these informal economy mostly thrive on cash economy, and because of demonetization, it impacted their business and also livelihood. So this cash dependent informal sector of the economy found it difficult to continue their business, especially when the cash flow was stopped. Now the issue with respect to demonetization was that the way or the quantum in which it impacted the informal economy, it did not impact the large corporation in the same manner. Why? Because the large corporation did not completely transacted in cash, and they also had a reserved pool of cash to be used in case of emergency. Now this reserve pool of cash is generally not available for the informal sector of the economy, and when cash supply was stopped, it impacted their transaction and hence their business was affected, and it also resulted in closure of many of the businesses, especially in the informal sector. Now the article further says that the impact of demonetization was further stretched by implementation of GST after some months. And here again, implementation of GST impacted more to the informal economy as compared to the formal economy. Now, according to the SBI report, the informal sector shrank from 52% of GDP in 2017-18 to 15 to 20% of GDP in 2020-21. So we can imagine the amount of loss which was sustained by the people working in the informal sector. And it not only impacted their business but also affected their livelihood. Now the lockdown imposed due to COVID pandemic further impacted the informal sector, and this also led to closure of most of the businesses mainly in the informal sector of the economy, or mainly in the base of the pyramid of Indian economy. So COVID pandemic further impacted the informal sector as lockdown led to closure of business for substantial amount of time for both formal and informal sector. Now, due to lack of reserve pool for the informal sector, it resulted in closure of their business, but this was not the case for the formal sector of the economy. So, the formal sector, particularly the large business players or the large corporates, not only survived the lockdown but are now thriving post lockdown. So, the sharp bounce witnessed in the economy, which we are seeing, is mostly because of the formal sector and mainly because of the large corporates. So, the large corporates survived and have gained maximum market share, especially post lockdown. So overall, we can say that the informal sector is in dire straits mainly due to triple blow or three sequential shocks, namely that of demonetization, GST implementation, and lockdown caused due to COVID pandemic. So vast majority of the Indian market, which thrives at the bottom of the pyramid, is finding difficult to recover from this triple shock. Now, the article further says that the target of demonetization to stop terror financing and reduce corruption has not really happened. And even the cash transaction as of now in the present times is at a much higher level as compared to 2016 when demonetization took place. So overall, these can be said to be some of the impact of demonetization mainly on the informal sector as has been discussed in this particular article. Now, based on our discussion, this becomes your practice question for the day. So the question is, consider the following statements. First, Constitution of India allows the center to increase duties or taxes through surcharge on all goods and services which have been brought under goods and services tax, that is GST. Second, most part of the revenue collected by the center on petroleum products for the year 2020-21 cannot be shared with states as they do not form part of divisible pool of taxes. So the question here is, which of the statements given above are correct? Options are A, 1 only, B, 2 only, C, both 1 and 2, and D, neither 1 nor 2. Now coming to the answer of yesterday, the question was, consider the following statements. First, minimum support price for agriculture in India is fixed by Ministry of Agriculture. No, this statement is incorrect as it is fixed by Committee on Agriculture Cost and Prices. Second, government uses A2 plus FL approach to calculate minimum support price for various crops. Yes, this is correct as was discussed by Nagendra sir yesterday. Third, cash crops do not come under the regime of minimum support price. No, the whole news yesterday was based on MSP with respect to cotton. So some of the cash crops do come under MSP regime. So the question was, which of the statements given above are correct? So here the correct answer becomes B, that is 2 only. So with this, we come to an end to today's analysis. Thank you for watching DNS.